Hi everyone, welcome back to Investing Club. I have a very special video planned today where we're going to go over Phil Town's portfolio in his new fund called the Rule 1 Fund. So if you don't know who Phil Town is, he is a very successful investor. He published a couple of books on investing, Rule 1 Investing and Payback Time, and these are books I highly recommend. If you are someone just starting out learning how to invest, these are the two books I would recommend the most out of any two investing books. And Rule 1 Investing was one of the first investing books I ever read, and it really opened my eyes to how value investing works and the power of it if you do it correctly. And the thing I love most about his books is, unlike most investing books where they just talk about theory, his book goes into detail step by step on exactly how to find the value of a company. And his strategy is one I adopted very closely for myself on how I value companies. For anyone wanting to learn more about how to invest, I would highly recommend his books. I will put a link to them in the description. And Phil Town also has a channel here on YouTube where he posts great videos. So definitely check out his YouTube channel and we'll go through his videos because this is someone you want to listen to and who really knows what he's talking about. So when I first heard this news that Phil Town's portfolio became public and I took a look, I was very surprised and very happy to see that my favorite stock in the stock market right now is actually Phil Town's biggest holding. So we're going to go through his holdings right now and see what stocks he thinks are a good value. His portfolio is both stocks and options. So if you're ready for me to go through the portfolio, hit the like button right now and we can see what stocks Phil Town owns. So Phil Town's fund, the Rule 1 Fund, has only been operating for around 9 months. And the strategy of his fund is exactly what he writes about in his books and his YouTube channel, buying undervalued companies, buying companies when they're at least 50% undervalued, and then seeing them increase back to their intrinsic value. All right, exactly as he said in his books and on his YouTube channel, our strategy is to buy great companies that are on sale and then hope the price goes down. Why? So you can buy more. So Phil Town also gives us some insight on what he thinks about the economy in the stock market, which I think is very valuable. And Phil Town says the overall price of all stocks are double their historical relationship to GDP, and the Shiller PE, which I've talked about in previous videos being incredibly high right now, is at elevations only seen 3 times in the past 140 years, all of which preceded major market crashes. And so Phil Town goes on to say that, you know, even with the stock market crash back in March, a lot of the companies I was looking at didn't even get down to prices where I was comfortable buying. And in this, he puts Charlie Munger's mantra, we make money when we wait. And so Phil Town is doing a lot of waiting right now. As I'll show you, his portfolio is over 50% cash. So he is definitely someone waiting and someone that expects that lower prices are to come in the near future, right? 11 years without a recession is a record. So that was just the longest bull market in history we had. And unlike some people who think we've already started a new bull market, Phil Town thinks that we've only just begun an economic downturn. So he talks about how bad will this get for the economy, and he basically says at the minimum we're in a deep recession. Ray Dalio, who I just talked about in my last video, says that we're already in a depression where we see GDP dropping, unemployment at an historical high since the 1930s. That's the kind of economy we're in right now, and that definitely does not bode well for the stock market. And a very interesting thing is that the Federal Reserve are doing the same thing now that they did in the 1930s during the Great Depression, dropping interest rates to 0% and printing money. The exact formula that we're seeing right now is exactly what they did back during the Great Depression. And if you follow that as a model, then you can expect to see lower prices to come not too long from now. Like I just said in my last video talking about Ray Dalio, the global pandemic revealed that countries cannot depend on each other to deliver critical supplies and products with a crisis. And so the trend is shifting away from globalization. A lot of companies are going to start moving factories to their own countries to produce goods there, and producing goods in a country like the United States is a lot more expensive than shipping them overseas to places like China, where the wages are cheaper, the cost of goods are cheaper. And so moving this production over to the US is going to lower margins and is going to decrease earnings for these companies, which we have seen go up by a large amount over the past decade. So where does Phil Town think the stock market will go from here? Well, he says the stock market has never crashed like this before in history and then melted up, sort of like we're seeing right now. And obviously we saw the crash because of the concerns about the pandemic, but we saw this melt up in Phil's opinion because he thinks fund managers are desperate for good returns and are basically following the Fed's lead into the stock market. And so because of all this money flowing into the stock market, we're seeing stocks go up. And a lot of people might be having confirmation bias about back in 2008 where the Federal Reserve saved the economy then, and they think the same thing's going to happen now. But Phil doesn't see that happening, and he thinks the worst is still yet to come for the stock market. So Phil Town thinks over the next 18 months, we're going to find a bottom in the stock market. I think that sounds like a pretty reasonable time frame. I can't time the market, so I don't know when we're going to find a bottom. But it seems reasonable that over the next year and a half, we are going to start to see the real repercussions of the economic shutdown on the economy. and people will react by selling stocks. Now here is where we get to where Phil talks about some of his holdings, and here's my favorite part of the letter when he talks about the stock that is my largest holding in the stock market right now, OZK, which is Bank OZK. And I was super surprised and super happy when I read this because, as you know, if you've watched my videos, Bank OZK is my largest holding. It's probably my favorite stock in the stock market right now. And right now it is currently Phil's largest holding in his fund. And he talks about Bank OZK, a truly remarkable bank run by who he believes is one of the best bankers in America, George Gleason. So in my analysis on Bank OZK, I'll put a link up to it right now. I talked about their incredible history, their incredible earnings growth, and the CEO behind it all, George Gleason, who's been running the company for over 40 years. That's what I was buying into when I was buying this company, Bank OZK. So the CEO, George Gleason, bought Bank of the Ozarks when he was only 26 years old with a loan. And the CEO's basic philosophy is to keep debt low, lend only when you have a huge margin of safety, and be ready with a lot of cash. And like I said in my analysis, they took advantage of the 2008 recession and acquired 14 other banks for dimes on the dollar. They had a lot of cash. They were ready because they knew that something was wrong in the economy, and when everything crashed, they swooped in and started buying a bunch of banks that were just destroyed by the recession. So what Phil thinks about the valuation of Bank OZK, this bank has a tangible book value at around $26 per share, and its peer group is selling at around 2 times their tangible book value. And so in Phil's opinion, the margin of safety price at a 50% margin of safety was around $30, and he thinks the value of this company is around $60. And if you go back to my analysis on the stock, I think I said it was worth around the $50 to $55 range. So me and Phil are definitely on the same page about the value of this company, even though he thinks it should be valued a little higher than I do currently. So then Phil talks about how he buys in tranches. He started buying at $30, and when we saw the crash in this stock, the stock dropped down to $17, $18, he bought there as well. And right now his cost basis is down to $27. So that is something I did too as well. When we saw that crash in March, I bought a lot at $17 and $18, and my average cost for Bank OZK is right around $25. So my average cost is lower than Phil's. And so Philtown has never actually revealed his portfolio before. So I was so excited when I saw that this stock was his biggest holding, as well as because it was my biggest holding. You know, I've been talking about the stock for a couple months. My first video I made about it was a couple months ago, and I've owned the stock for almost a year at this point. And reading this about Philtown being so high on the stock really proves a lot to me, because it shows me that one of the people who influenced my investing most has gone through the same thought process as me and actually ended up buying the same stock that I did. And so it's no surprise that Philtown likes the stock. If you look at his own website, you see how highly it's ranked. His website is toolbox.rule1investing.com. It's a tool that you can sign up and use for free. And this is a tool I use very often because it shows the history of the company and the most important metrics you should be looking at and how they've changed over time. So in the past 10 years, their book value and dividend growth rate 30%, earnings per share 30%, cash flow 24%, and sales 19%. This is a bank that's been growing at an incredibly fast rate. And even though that has slowed down in the recent 3 years to 1 year, I think we're going to see that accelerate again as we enter a new cycle in the economy. You also see return on equity 14% and return on invested capital hovering right under 10% for 10 years, and very conservative debt, 1.6 years earnings. So like he said in his letter, this is a very well-run bank with a management team that knows what they're doing. So anyway, enough about this stock. I've talked about Bank OZK enough. Let's get to the rest of his portfolio. So the first thing to know is that Philtown is holding a lot of cash in his portfolio. His total investments only make up 70% of the portfolio, so he has 30% in cash right off the bat. And then he also has more cash within the investment portfolio. He also see he has 36% in a money market fund. And even though money market funds are technically an investment, they're basically made up of short-term assets like treasury bills, treasury notes, assets that are safe and very liquid that basically act in the same way as cash. So if you add these two things together, Philtown has around 2/3 of his portfolio in cash right now. And this definitely matches up with something I'm doing. As I've said, I have around 50% of my portfolio sitting in cash. So it seems like we're both on the same page, waiting for stocks to drop more to find an attractive price to buy some of these great companies. So we can take a look at some of the stocks he owns. He has them listed by sector, and in consumer discretionary, we have Gildan Activewear, which is also another stock I've talked about in one of my videos, where I said it was a great buy at under $10 and it should be worth around $30 a share. So Philtown obviously has the same idea with that as well. He also owns Sturm, Ruger & Co., which is an American firearms maker. He owns Ulta Beauty. For financials, Bank OZK, which we went over, Berkshire Hathaway, and also Goldman Sachs, which I think Goldman Sachs is a very interesting stock right now. The stock has been depressed by a large amount. From what I see with the financial metrics of Goldman Sachs, they do seem pretty undervalued. For industrials, they own Boeing and Southwest Airlines. So Phil Town is someone, I guess, that expects the airline industry to bounce back at least somewhat. Southwest probably has the safest balance sheet out of all airlines, and Boeing probably will bounce back at some point. For materials, CF Industry Holdings. For real estate, Seritage Growth Properties. This is a very interesting pick because this is one that Warren Buffett owns. This is one that Pabrai owns. A lot of professional money managers own this stock, and I think it has some great upside. The only thing is most of their assets are with Sears buildings, and so with the shutdown we have, I don't know how that's going to impact them. From what I've seen, they do have some short-term liquidity problems, so that is my main concern with this company for that. But if they do get through the next year and raise some extra cash and by selling off their assets, this may be one that I'm looking to invest in. So that's it for the stock side, but something else in Phil Town's portfolio is he actually lists the options that he currently owns. And Phil Town is a net seller of options. So Phil Town isn't a buyer of options, he's a seller of options. So that means he sells options to collect premium, and for exchange, he has the obligation to buy these stocks that he wrote put options for at a certain price. And this information is incredibly valuable because basically what Phil Town is saying is these are the companies I want to buy, and if the price gets down to this is where I'm comfortable buying. So these are the stocks that Phil Town is looking at, Bank of America, and the exercise price is where you would have to buy them if the price got below that. So Phil Town thinks Bank of America at under $17.50 is a good buy. I think Bank of America bottomed out in March at just above $18, so I don't think it's gone down there yet. He also has put options on Sanderson's Farm, Berkshire Hathaway again, Gildan, Boeing, Ulta. So mostly the same companies that he owns, he's also selling put options on. And so if you look at the exercise prices for these options that he's selling, these are the prices he's willing to pay for these stocks. And so that's why I think this is incredibly valuable information because it actually shows what he thinks would be a good price to buy these stocks. So that's it for the video. I think it's so cool to finally see someone who's influenced my own investing so much to see what they actually own in their portfolio. Let me know what you think of Phil Town's portfolio. Let me know if you own any of the same stocks as him. And let me know if, like me and Phil Town, you are holding a lot of cash in anticipation of lower prices to come soon. If you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next video.